Waiting for the eyeball.
Yep.
And here we are for another episode of Dualistic Unity Raw. I love these episodes, I gotta say. And it's just because I'm really getting into the habit of just not thinking about them beforehand. I did a bunch of stuff this morning, edited an episode. We're going to have an episode get released later on today that I'm very excited about. A fantastic conversation with a longtime friend of the show, Daisy, from the Life Unpotted podcast. We recorded that a few weeks back. I've still got a backlog of videos that I'm editing right now, and that's great. I'm really excited about that. And it's funny because this morning I connected with Andrew here on Restream. Shout out to Restream for being a fucking kick-ass platform. And because I was rendering a video at the time, I didn't want to enable my webcam because it kind of slows down the whole thing. And so I just maintained my audio stream, and I was chatting with Andrew, and he kind of got an experience of what it is to just listen to me without the face there, which is something that we don't normally do. And then it dawned on us that a lot of you have only experienced the podcast in that way, that a lot of you actually only listen to the podcast. And I would just like to invite you to check out our YouTube channel. And the reason I say that is because it's a different experience. It's a different experience because there's more than just what you're listening to. You actually get to see the ridiculousness of what we're doing on the screen, how animated and excited that we get, all the hand movements I tend to do. It's fun. It really is. And it is a different way of experiencing what it is that we're doing, because it's easy to listen to this and project an image. We are not that image. This is also the reason it is so important to come to the retreats or any event where you can meet us in person. We actually had a small event in Colorado, not a mini retreat, but something in between, where we just went to a karaoke bar in Denver, and we had a bunch of people who listened to the show come to the karaoke bar and join us. It was insane. It was so much fun. We had like 20 people there or something like that all together. It was so much fun. But that's an opportunity for you to meet us, to see who we are in person, to get a slightly more nuanced view of us, because listening to somebody or even just seeing them on a video, you're still seeing kind of a certain moment of their life. It's not like I come to the podcast and I'm being the goofy motherfucker that I am the rest of the time, because frankly, this is a rare opportunity for me to get into a conversation I really, really enjoy. So the goofiness kind of gets set aside a little bit. But when you see me in person and I've got nothing but fucking time with you, expect the goofy. And that's the whole point. That's why it's worth doing. And so I just wanted to mention that quickly. As such, I'm going to pass it to Andrew in a second, but I do want to mention one more time, because we'd mentioned at the end of the last episode, our plans for Australia in April have changed. We will not be doing the Australia retreat as planned in April. It would be held off for a certain amount of time. We are going to be focusing on our Netherlands retreat. This is going to be the last 9-day event that we do until fall next year. And fall next year, we're not sure where that's going to be, but we'll get back to you on that. So if you would like to enjoy a 9-day experience, the Dualistic Unity Retreat experience, it's only happened twice before now, and both times were just fucking mind-blowing, then I encourage you to join us in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands. Yeah, there you go. The face is working again. Because it's going to be just incredible. 34 community members, not including Andrew and myself. It's a lot of discussion. It's a lot of opportunities for vulnerability. It's also just a massive, massive property, which means that you can just wander off if you'd like to have some personal time. You can find a nice little quiet spot under a tree if you'd like to. There's also the wood-fired hot tub, which I'm very excited about because it looks like a giant wood barrel. I'm not sure why that excites me so much, except for the old worldy vibe that it kind of gives, because I really appreciate where things came from. So a wood-fired hot tub sounds just delightful. But yeah, if you can join us, we would love to see you. There's going to be meals provided. We have a chef that's going to be staying with us, that's going to be providing breakfast and dinners and lunch plate for everybody to have. All substances are covered as well. We will have live music. There's a classical guitarist that will be arriving. We're trying to arrange an on-site massage therapist, so that may be an option as we approach the event. And aside from that, we're going to have group yoga. So there's that. I'm going to probably get into Reiki and Wing Chun a little bit for anybody who wants to talk about it, because everybody who knows me knows I love to babble about that shit. And yeah, it's just a great opportunity to hang out with Andrew and I and the other members of the community that maybe you've only met through Zoom, or maybe you've only heard through a roundtable. So definitely join us if you can. I will throw up the QR code rather than just talking about it as soon as I can find it, and I'm going to pass it over to Andrew.
Yeah, and I think with the retreats, especially in the Netherlands, the full retreat, if you're on the edge, hesitant about it, it's an opportunity to go through something that will inevitably change your life. It'll inevitably change you. And it's not a typical vacation, going to the Netherlands, hanging. It's gonna change the way that you see things inevitably. Like, you're around a bunch of people who are in the same boat. Maybe there's a certain, perspective on your life, way you see things, sort of habitual tendencies that you have in your day-to-day life, a way of seeing yourself that you're like, I haven't been able to be in a spot where I see things differently enough to make drastic change. And of course, in your day-to-day life, you can have that opportunity. You always have the potential to question the habitual thought patterns that you have arising. But these retreats are really an opportunity to just face that head on, just go into it and be like, oh yeah, I really don't have to continue to tell myself this story. I don't have to see myself in this exact way just because I think it's safe, just because I think it's helpful to maintain this story that I always have, and I don't even know if there's a way to see myself differently. And these retreats, they shake you in the best way possible. So if you're looking for a shift, a new perspective, a changed way of looking at yourself, looking at reality, looking at other people, looking at the world, like, this is the opportunity to do so. Like, it really is life changing. They're 9 days, but they feel like 9 months. Like, they really are so full of an experience and so different than anyone's day-to-day life, like almost anyone's. And it's different enough for you to realize that you have the power and the potential to change your day-to-day life. Even if it doesn't change on the outside, you change, and so therefore it changes. Because it's always right there, the opportunity to see things a little bit differently. And this is something that you mentioned, like, going into these calls without any thoughts, and I've had enough that I'm going through right now, and just like, I don't even know. There's not really a way for me to say anything. Everyone's always going through shit, but it's like, for me at least, just today, it's been a back and forth between taking thoughts seriously and immediately seeing the consequence and feeling the weight, and then, like, dropping them really quickly, and all of a sudden it's like gone. It's like, what the fuck? It's not that it's that easy, but in a sense it is. Like, how much of the weight we carry with us, and like the ups and the downs, the ins and the outs. It's like I'm realizing more clearly the consequence of investing in false certainty and investing in thought. And so, to me right now, because it's such a drastic difference between taking thought seriously and not taking it seriously, like not taking that false certainty so seriously, or thinking that it could be, that I feel like when I do, you know, invest, indulge in certain perceptions, false certainties, it feels like there's more of a consequence than there ever was. Like, the weight is like, woo, it's like really compresses me to feel like I'm holding a lot. Whereas years ago, it didn't feel like that much, but it makes me wonder if it's just because back then I didn't even know what it was like to not take my thoughts seriously, that it was just my baseline was taking those things seriously. And so, without, like, through recognizing that I don't have to take them seriously, I get a taste for what it's like to not take them seriously. And so when I do, it's like, holy shit, that's the weight of the world right there. The weight of false certainty is so heavy. and it was just my baseline before, and so now it's like, holy fuck, it seems like it's more, but it's just what it was, and it's always that sort of feeling. We just get used to it. We're like, oh yeah, this is just the way it is. And so even just this morning, it was like a back and forth, moment to moment, like feeling okay, feeling totally fine, and then like investing in a little bit, and then it's like £1,000,000, and then it's like, oh yeah, but I don't know that, and then it's gone. And it's like this back and forth, and I'm like, what the fuck? And it's all just me. It's all just my attachment to that perception, thinking there's any degree of truth or certainty, and thinking that there's a benefit to doing so, and the back and forth. And so, anyway, bringing it back to the retreats, they're an opportunity to see things differently enough to realize that you don't have to take those things so seriously. And you're in a different enough spot that you realize, oh, it is just my perception. And so you go back to your life where you thought it was all of these other things. You thought it was all of this shit, your job, your family, your friends, your this, your that. And so it's an opportunity to realize, like, oh, it's just me. And so therefore the responsibility is on me, but the potential to see things differently is always on me. And so I can go back into the same exact situation that I was in my life and realize that it's my false certainty that I'm holding on to about this. And if you can let that go, that entire reality, which is your entire life, changes despite maybe not that much changing. You go back to the same job, the same sort of routines, but you're different. And so therefore, everything else is different. And that's the opportunity that these retreats really provide. And that's why we have no hesitation in saying that they're absolutely life changing.
Because, and it's really interesting because you were saying like when all of a sudden you're taking it seriously, it's like you're under all the pressure that's ever been there, right? And then you're like, oh wait, no, that I don't know, and then it kind of disappears. But how often are we surrounded by people who are like, yeah, that's important. That's exactly what you're supposed to think. That's what I think. That's what everybody else thinks. Why don't you value these things? And so it's almost like it's harder for us in those moments to go, well, I don't know, because everybody around us is like, no, we know. That's exactly what it is. And it's like, eh, like that's often the case, especially lately, in terms of people throwing around psychological disorders just willy-nilly, as a way of kind of categorizing themselves, and even when it's not actually diagnosed. I find that one really interesting, the self-diagnosed bipolar disorder or the self-diagnosed anxiety disorder. It's like experiencing something doesn't mean it's a disorder. Like, and that's exactly the problem with the word disorder, right? Is we tend to think, it's uncommon to experience these things. It's like, no, that's living. It's part of life. It's just how much you're staring at it. So when you're around people who are staring at a lot of identity and ego and the mentality that goes with that, it's really hard to keep reminding yourself like that's not the case, right? Because now not only do you have to remind yourself, I don't know, but none of them know either. And then you have to face the fact that they're running from not knowing, and then you have a whole other level to reality. And so it gets kind of tricky, or rather, it can get murky and all encompassing. It can be very challenging. And these retreats are an opportunity to kind of leave that cacophony of conflicting sounds and find a moment of just clear space with people who are also being similarly quiet and appreciative of that clear space, rather than pulling and pushing each other, going, no, I know this and you don't know that, and arguing and doing all of that. You don't have any of that. You have everybody kind of sitting in that space of just being like, we don't know. Whew, that feels kind of weird. And everybody's like, yeah, it does feel kind of weird. Want to go jump in the hot tub? Yeah, that sounds good. Like things like that. Or, hey, dinner's ready. Let's all go sit down and chat about not knowing and the joy of feeling free of having to know with people who actually appreciate it. That's why the retreats are so powerful. And again, you get to see Andrew and I in our full glory, just being weird and smoking giant fat joints and having a great time. We play pool. We do a bunch of cool stuff. We do have potentially one more mini retreat that could be happening between now and the Netherlands event. This is in Vancouver. We haven't decided yet. We're still leaving it open to our audience. If this is something that you have an interest in, do check out dualistiCunity.com/Vancouver And there's a form there. You can fill it in saying whether or not you're absolutely interested or just 75% sure that you can go. And then you can fill in your email address. And if we decide to carry on with the event, we'll contact you and we'll let you know when the tickets are going to be available. So that'll be the last event between now and the Netherlands retreat, though. So just keep that in mind. And again, Australia is not happening, so there's not going to be any major retreats after this Netherlands retreat until the fall of next year. But there will be a camping trip. There will be a camping trip next summer, which I'm very excited about, but that is not going to be providing you any degree of comfort in terms of being a soft, cushy bed or having chef cooked meals or anything like that. It will be dirty. It will be fun. And it will be on the edge of the Pacific Ocean where there's nothing but night sky. So I'm very excited about that. But yeah, for a chance to sit in a hot tub and just chill for 9 days with Andrew and I, definitely check out the Netherlands. I couldn't be more excited about that event.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of having different types of events is the Netherlands is gonna be awesome, not relatively, very comfortable overall, despite the, or besides the internal things you may go through and whatever comes up that you're able to work through in, the safest, most comfortable environment that you can with a bunch of people who are very familiar with going through just crazy shit. Like I laugh when people come to our calls, especially like the free groups, and they're like, "This sounds crazy. This might sound crazy. And I'm like, I'm just like, try us. Like if I think it's crazy, like Ray definitely won't, and it's very unlikely given the things we've seen or gone through or perspectives or just willingness to be uncertain to the degree that we are, that you're going to say anything that we think is crazy at all. Like, if anything, it'll be like, yeah, I've actually experienced something very, very similar to that. And so if you're someone who feels like, you know, you're crazy for having a certain perspective or just certain thoughts that come up and you're like, can I even talk about this? It's like this is the place to talk about it. Not even just a retreat, but just a group or listening to the podcast or checking it out. Like if you think you're crazy, like test that shit out on us, and I'm sure that perspective will shift at least a little bit. But with in regards to that comment on the certainty and just like the our lack of willingness to shift or see things differently, it's so interesting with the push and the expansion of disorders and whatnot, how much will take a fleeting experience and turn it into this thing that we're almost forcing to last forever. Like we're reinforcing it every time. And especially when, like, I think calling something a disorder even is like kind of an extreme of false certainty, right? Like labeling myself, I am Andrew and I am bipolar. It's like there's this extreme false certainty that like this is me and this will last forever. Like we had a call recently, I think it might have been a Patreon call where someone was going through something, a disorder, and you told them like, "Oh yeah, I actually have been diagnosed with that in the past." And they were mind blown that you don't identify as having that. You don't see yourself as someone with that anymore because there's such a draw to this false certainty like, "Oh, I have this and therefore it's going to last forever. This is my lot in life for the rest of my life." And that's so many things, this idea that what I'm going through right now, the experience that I'm going through, the situation that I'm in, the day that I'm having is going to last forever. Like, it never does. But we almost, I don't know if we want it to. There's some sense of certainty, security that comes with thinking that I know that this is the case, and yet this massive cost. And we don't even take a moment to realize or recognize that it's not going to last forever. And it's like the fear of it lasting forever. We then invest in it to try and confirm it in a sense. And it's only weighing us down. It's only adding more weight to the experience as opposed and reinforcing everything that we think we are. But it's never the case. Like it never lasts forever. Even the situation that you're in, so much of the extended experience of it is your idea of what you think it is, and the desire to define what you're going through right now as something separate from just being you here now, experiencing something. And with that certainty comes the idea of, oh, is this a good thing that I'm experiencing or a bad thing? If it's a bad thing, I got to get rid of it. I have to do something to get rid of it, as opposed to just recognizing that it being getting rid of, change happening, is the natural state, is our baseline state. Like, you don't have to do something to change shit. It's changing. You're changing all the time. And it's that resistance to what's happening, the desire to get rid of it, that stagnates it and actually keeps it around so much longer. But it's that desire for that control and that false certainty that hinders us from realizing that that change is the baseline. That change is what you are. You're not something that's stagnant, existing separate from reality on the side of that river. You are that river going through shit, trying to know what it's going through without actually being able to ever possibly know what the next point in your life is going to be.
That's a really interesting point, and again, I say this as somebody who had numerous different diagnoses in terms of what was wrong with me, quote unquote, in terms of mental disorders. And over time, you start to recognize that they really are just, habitual patterns, like they're habitual patterns of thinking about things. We kind of talked about this with ADHD in that episode, Community Topics number 20, for anybody who's interested, that we have such a negative perception of ADHD. In general, we actually think that ADHD itself is a disorder rather than just not fitting the common mentality that's preferred by our system, right? Like, it's just that they don't think in an easily controllable linear fashion, and therefore it's out of order with the rest of what would be preferred. So it's a disorder, but there's a number of different strengths in ADHD, and the fact that somebody who has ADHD, exhibits the characteristics that are often called ADHD, are usually hyper intelligent, right? Often autodidactic if given the opportunity to be so. And why? Well, because they have that nonlinear learning process. They jump from one thing to the other. And you might go, well, that's a terrible way to learn. It really depends on what you're trying to learn. As a general understanding of the universe, it's a great way to learn. If you're trying to have a very specific understanding of one certain thing, that's a terrible way to learn. But if you're trying to have an overall general understanding of everything as a whole, it's a great way to learn. Take it from me. Right? People have often gotten frustrated in the past with me and my jumping around from one thing to another, but all of those things were leading me to a more general understanding of myself and the world that I'm a part of. Right? And so we look at these things as disorders because we're looking for a reason, for an explanation as to why it's so fucking hard. Right? Like, why is it so hard to get through life? And then we go to a psychologist or a psychiatrist and we express, I find myself just getting lost in thoughts all the time. They're like, thoughts about what? Right? And then they'll go, and you'll tell them about what? Say it's about yourself. Thoughts about myself, thoughts about who I could be, thoughts about different parts of me, thoughts about, oh, that's dissociative identity disorder, right? Dissociative disorder is disassociating from being here in the moment. That's just getting lost in thought, right? Reactively, reflexively over time, without any awareness that you are getting lost in thought, because you've actually trained yourself to think that thought is the truth. So as soon as there's a thought, you're sucked into it, right? And it gets to the point where you can't actually get out, and it feels like you're fucking drowning. And you'll go and they'll say you have a dissociative disorder. People will actually panic about disassociating, not recognizing that it comes from a fucking pattern. It comes from a pattern. And to some degree, those moments of not being right here in reality are fucking necessary for you to process something. We call it daydreaming. We call it going through memory, stuff like that. Sometimes that's just process and it does require your attention. Is that a negative? Not necessarily, unless there's a system that's like, but you should be paying attention to your work all the time. You're not being fucking productive, right? Therefore, disassociating is bad. Right? But we're not looking at the fact that it's not something wrong with you. It's a category of behavior. Okay, disorders are a category of fucking behaviors. It's not something wrong with you. Okay, that whole thing, oh, it's a chemical imbalance. They've never tested the chemicals in your brain. Guaranteed, I'm telling that to whoever the fuck is listening. They're not measuring your serotonin levels all the time. They're not monitoring these things. They're not telling you that. Okay. But we do know that there is a link between mind and body. We understand that your brain very much is influenced by your attention and that it's changing all the time in terms of synaptic pruning. So if you're constantly conditioning this habit of getting lost in your thoughts because that you think they reflect your value, that they reflect truth, that they reflect any real aspect of who the fuck you are, you're just going to continuously get lost in them because you think you need to. But as you start to question that, you start to take that category of behavior and you rip it apart. So you could say, oh, I got over the disorder, or you could say, I recognize the behavior. And over time, through work and self-honesty, found a way to basically moderate its effect on me. Like I've talked to you before about when I was struggling with OCD, like to a very large degree. Like I would consistently walk back to my oven to make sure it was off. I would consistently go back to my apartment to make sure the door was locked. Like I would get lost in this loop that would take 15, 20 minutes, man, of me just walking down the stairs, coming back to my apartment, walking. Like it was fucking brutal. It was like hell. Okay. And over time, you start to recognize that a lot of that is fucking doubt. It's this loop of doubt. And eventually you just got to go, fuck, if I left it unlocked, somebody might just steal my shit and walk away. Right? And you do that often enough, all of a sudden you start to counteract that obsession because you're letting go of the need for control, which is where obsession comes from. Right? And so, yeah, a lot of these things that at one point I was told is something wrong with me is something that I have now more or less learned to mitigate just through awareness and self-responsibility, honesty, time, empathy, and not judging myself. And this is the whole thing. Now it's funny because we talk about mental health and we talk about quote unquote disorders and we recognize the consequences of those, but we don't look at the benefits, right? Because there are, of course, benefits to going through every type of hardship if you look at it that way. But we recognize that, we identify with those and we go, well, it's a bad thing though. And yet we identify with religion, see all the benefits and none of the fucking consequences, not recognizing that the need to believe in something is just as much a mental health disorder as anything else.
That's a really interesting point. I've never thought of OCD or anything as it's almost like a bubbling up of something that's within us, and we just look at the OCD kind of like with addictions. We look at addictions as the thing as opposed to what we're trying to escape. With OCD, it's like a lot of it comes from this doubt. And so there's a benefit to seeing that sort of manifest in reality, right? It's like, oh, there's actually a lot of doubt behind this. Where is the doubt coming from? As opposed to, I have OCD, I gotta fix that. It's like that doubt's gonna pop up some other way. You deal with the OCD, you don't have that as much anymore, and then the doubt's gonna arise in another situation, just literally any situation, self-doubt can show its, rear its ugly head in a sense. But it's always so there's almost a benefit to going there's absolutely a benefit to seeing those as showing you something as opposed to existing in silo. And I've never really realized that's just it's like all this shit under the surface and then OCD pops through and it's like, "Oh, here's a big consequence. This is taking away from my life." Like investing in any degree of thought to the extreme. And another thing you said kind of shifted my perspective in the sense that it's not to say that I don't utilize thought, but I've definitely had an overarching negative idea of thought and like thought being a bad thing as opposed to a tool that we can utilize. Like there's a fuckload of benefits, even to daydreaming. Like how many things I've had, and I'm just realizing it now, like, different video ideas from me, just like kind of sitting there, getting lost in thoughts and thinking about stuff. Then it's like, things come together and it's like, oh, that could be cool. Yeah, that could be a good idea. And I never think that like that's where it came from. It's just a balance, like with everything. But there's never a thing. It's not like get rid of thought. Not like the like fucking Eckhart Tolle saying his superpower is not being able to not think for 7 minutes. And it's like, I don't mind Eckhart. I like a lot of his books. I really appreciated a lot of them. But it reinforces this stigma that like thinking is a bad thing, that it's a wrong thing to do. Because then you do it and then you judge yourself and you're on this fucking crazy ass loop. And then you're thinking again about the judgment, about the thing you did wrong and how you should do it right and you're like, fuck, how do I live? I got to get rid of these thoughts. I got to suppress them. I got to avoid them. But it's not that because they're not bad. There's nothing wrong with it. There are benefits to that as well. Just like there are benefits to OCD if you don't identify with it. When you see it, as you said, as a behavior, it's like, oh, there's something here. There's a lot of doubt here. Why do I doubt myself? Where is that coming from? And you look at that, and then all of a sudden, the things that you're doing as a product of that OCD aren't as prevalent anymore. You don't see the need to invest in them anymore. And then it's not going to arise in other ways. Like how many things we do that just arise in other ways, shapes, and forms, like forever. And we think it's just the thing that we're doing. And we don't look at it as an opportunity to overcome something in any situation that we go through. People will avoid certain situations like, "Oh, I'm afraid of that. I can't do that." And it's this avoidance as opposed to a willingness to see that it's not this situation. It's a certainty you have about yourself of what you can and can't do, what you are and aren't capable of that may have come from some, deep childhood stuff, some stuff from a long time ago that you experienced, but it doesn't mean that it's true. And there was an assumption early on that it was true, and so therefore there were means of dealing with it, and the idea that there's something wrong and the perspective that you're so sure of that this is a bad thing and not like it's really hard to categorize anything in silo as a bad thing. Like they're all opportunities. And then as we categorize it, there's this inherent resistance to anything we label as something bad or wrong. So what the fuck benefit is that doing? Besides just it's a force. It's that mechanism of control. Like I can control this. If I label it as bad, then I can figure out how to control it and get rid of it. It's like, okay, you get rid of that, the shit's still there. And so that control is futile because it's just a product of a way that you're seeing yourself or a way that you're interacting with reality or a certainty that you're holding on to. And we're not willing to question the certainty about ourself, the perspective of ourself, despite it arising in so many different ways, shapes, and forms. And then, so we act according to the certainties that we hold on to. And it's just when you're willing to look beyond the actions that you take and it's really the perspective of yourself that you're holding on to and question that, then the actions don't make as much sense anymore and they kind of start to naturally fall apart as opposed to digging in being like, okay, this is a bad thing that I'm doing. I got to stop doing that. And there's something wrong with me for doing it, despite it being the product of you thinking there's something wrong with you to begin with. And that's just a fucking vicious cycle because we're unwilling to question the things that we're so fucking sure of that we're not actually sure of ever.
Exactly. It's interesting because we have this response to thought, and we're like, oh God, that's bad. Like I don't like those. Or we have a certain thought, like we have a response to something like judgment. We're like, ah, that's bad too. Why? Well, because it hurts us, right? Well, why does it hurt us? Because we're afraid of it, right? Like that's the whole thing. Like, why are thoughts bad? Because you identify in a way that pushes you. So thoughts influence you. So you don't feel free when you're thinking, right? So therefore, you got to stop thinking? No. You just have to stop taking the thoughts as truth, which means they can play all fucking day. And it still comes down to your choice as to what to do with them. But at the moment, or at least very often, If you're afraid because you identify, so your thoughts are serious and important, right? You'll think that they're bad because they're the source of your suffering. This is where that whole non-duality thing comes from. There is no me, right? Because me is the source of my suffering. Why would I want to think about that? It's like it's only the source of your suffering because you take it so seriously. You make it into a concept and you have to defend it, and then you have conflict with reality. You could just not do that, be yourself, and recognize that that is the all of everything. That being yourself is the simplest thing that you can do and the most aligned thing possible, right? But we vilify things because they're the source of our unhappiness, not me, right? Not me or my response to them, right? Thoughts are bad. The pain body. The pain body teaches us how to empathize. You know, all of the stuff that we go through teaches us how to empathize. That's why it's important. Somebody was mentioning that you can't just ignore OCD, and I would like to encourage that person in the comment section to go back earlier in this episode because nobody said anything about ignoring OCD. What we did talk about was taking responsibility for where it comes from and understanding that, you know, as it has been referred to numerous times as a doubter's illness, there is something that you can do about it. It's not about ignoring it. So do go and check out earlier in this episode. I think you'll find it really useful and interesting. I just wanted to mention that very quickly. We have a bunch of people here today. Wow. Look at all the people here today. I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who could join us on today's live stream. It's really nice to have you here. If you haven't checked it out, do check out the Dualistic Unity podcast. It's what we do 5 days a week. We're actually recording an episode right now, and we do a free live group every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. You can check it out at dualisticunity.com under the live events section, and you can be on the screen chatting with us, talking to us, asking questions, sharing your insights, sharing your stories, all of which is encouraged because it's the community that's grown up around this podcast that really makes it what it is. And what it is, we don't fucking know, but it's growing.
Yeah, it's a great question. I feel like I used to have an easy fucking response, and now I'm like, I don't fucking know. It's just about being able to be yourself and recognizing there's not actually anything wrong with you and you can just be yourself. Like there's so many things in the way of us just being ourselves. So much false certainty, so many things that we think that we are that we aren't. And I think that identification is like a short-term mechanism of avoiding responsibility that feels easier in the moment. You know, like that I'm this. I have OCD, like passes off. And we're again, go back. This will be posted at some point later this week or at some point, and you can go back early into the episode. And I don't know, maybe you can on Twitch or YouTube also just rewind a little bit. But it's not to say that you just avoid and suppress it. It's just that you don't attach yourself to it. You don't think it means something about you. You can recognize a behavior that you're taking without thinking that that's the all and everything of what you are. Like just because you have act in a way that is, you know, related to OCD or even think that you have it, it doesn't mean that there's a finality to it. It's a behavior pattern. It's not you. And there's nothing inherently wrong with it. It's just a pattern of behavior that has consequences on the fullness with which you can live your life. But instead of recognizing that this isn't actually my lot in life, we say that it is, and then that passes off the responsibility of dealing with it. And so every time it happens, it's just like, oh yeah, but I have OCD and this is just how I am. And so it's like a passing of the responsibility of doing it. It's like, oh, I can keep doing it because I have it. And it's okay, as opposed to in the moment questioning whether you do. Like there isn't any finality to anything that we do or experience. And you can recognize an experience for what it is without identifying with it. Like, oh, I am someone with OCD. It's like you can shift that to saying I experience patterns that some consider OCD here and there, but it's not what I am. And that allows you to actually look at it as opposed to being like, "Oh, this is just it. I just have it." And then kind of working your life around it. And so you never really look at it. It's like something, and we're just using OCD, we're just running with that, but it can be any disorder that we attach to, anything that you're, diagnosed with. Just because even if you're diagnosed with it right now, it's the identifying with it kind of makes it into this eternal thing, this forever thing, and that's never the case. And so we'll solidify that. We'll, like, put that marker in the sand and be like, this is me, and then we'll dance around it without ever looking at it. It's like, if you're willing to look at it and be like, okay, this is a pattern of behavior, but it isn't me. And each and every moment I have the opportunity to see it a little bit differently, or question it, or in the moment, even, like, have the opportunity to take a different action. Like you said, with going back to the house back and forth. And I've had things in my life where I do that, like even getting caught up in, like, walking down the street and, like, oh, don't step on the crack. And then it becomes this sort of, like, obsessive thing. And then it's like you're kind of jumping around and, like, walking like a crazy person, as opposed to just being like, I don't know if stepping on a crack's actually gonna break my mom's back or not. Like, the amount of control that comes with that whole shtick, and it comes to a point where you're like, you know, yeah, if my door's unlocked, it is what it is. I'm gonna deal with it. But the alternative is spending your entire life worrying about whether it's gonna be. Like, I would rather lose some things than hold on to that weight, but that takes responsibility for yourself and your willingness to recognize that, it's not this end all be all thing. And that's it. We're not saying that, oh, just ignore it. Oh, you don't actually have it. It's like, no, it's just not what you are, and it doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It's still absolutely a pattern of behavior that people experience and do, and it's fucking intense, and it can feel like it's the all and everything of your life, any disorder that you're diagnosed with. And that's why we're so quick to be like, yeah, this is just it, as opposed to being willing to see that it doesn't mean something about you. It doesn't mean that you're wrong or broken or inherently incorrect. It's just something that you experience, and it doesn't mean it's going to last forever. But there has to be a willingness to take responsibility and not immediately identify with it, because that's a means of almost just avoiding the responsibility for dealing with it, and your impact on it. You just think it's something that's happened to me, as opposed to me continuing to invest in a perception of myself that I think is so certain because I just want to know what I am, when you can't.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. How much would the world change if we could just replace the word disorder with tendency? Right? Like, I have a tendency towards obsession and compulsion. I have a tendency towards anxiety. I have a tendency towards being bipolar. Tendency. I love it. Oh my God. Can we all get a show of hands? Whoever's listening to this right now, can we all just start using the word fucking tendency instead of disorder? How much would shit change just for yourself subjectively, just through that slight shift in tone? Because that's all it fucking is. It might be, a deeply ingrained tendency, but that doesn't mean it's anything but a tendency. So I just wanted to end on that note. We have a question. Somebody's wrestling with the, not attaching to themselves and so on and so forth. This is somebody who was on the show recently, so I'm excited to answer this. How do you combat the influence of social media, as it seems to constantly attach meaning and value to ego or an individuated sense of self? I do not, because it's not my fucking problem what social media does. I use it for what I want to do, and what social media tends to value is up to the rest of social media. I don't combat anything. I just don't take that shit seriously. Now I'll pass it over to Andrew.
Shoot, I was looking for the question to read it as you were talking, and I kind of missed it. Do you mind reading it again? Nice. I was trying to
For
wondering.
anybody wondering, I've put it on the screen. If you're listening right now, I've put the question on the screen. This is why I encourage you to watch the video version.
Yeah. Wait. Fuck, it's not showing the whole thing. I think I actually saw that on here as I was scrolling.
It's
It's the
really
link.
not. So it's not as helpful as I was hoping, is it?
No, it's all good. Yeah, I found it. I've gone through this journey of attachment. I'll just I'll just read it again as I'm reading it. As I'm trying to
Thank you.
understand
It's
non-dualism.
better than
Yeah, right. Question is, I'm trying to understand non-dualism and not attaching myself so stringently to thoughts, feelings, behaviors, i.e., ego, self-concept, etc. I'm wondering a couple things. As y'all have gone through this journey of detachment to this sense of false self, i.e., non-self, how do I combat the influence of social media as it seems to constantly attach meaning and value to ego or an individuated sense of self? Um, I don't even remember what you said, but not taking it seriously, like recognizing that the perception people have of you is entirely different. Each and every person is going to see you differently than you see yourself. You see yourself differently than everyone else sees you. And so social media, like anything, is people are always trying to put you in a box. They're trying to be sure of what you are. And social media, people love to demonize social media as like this, the devil incarnate, but it's just a tool. It's just an opportunity that amplifies some of the tendencies that we have as human beings. And I was having a conversation with someone recently, and we were talking about, and they were saying like, oh, social media has been detrimental to teenagers' mental health, and social media is the problem. And I was like, no, it's our tendency to define ourselves and try and measure ourselves, and take our idea of ourselves very seriously, that social media amplifies. And it's another mechanism of comparison, but people were comparing themselves for a very long time. We've been comparing ourselves and judging ourselves because of some social norm that we think we should be living up to. And it's all this desire for certainty, to become something, thinking I'm wrong with me right now. And obviously, social media has like some of the tools, especially with fucking editing, some of the shit I see where it's like, that's just straight up not that person. That is a made up person that's been edited for a couple hours, and that person doesn't exist in real life. That's not a real thing. And so being willing, there is a helpful recognition that the things you see there aren't the truth. Like, just like with everything you see is not the truth. Everything you're seeing in quote unquote real life also isn't the truth. Your assumptions about other people, the way that they look, the way you look, the way other people see you, are also not the truth. No differently than on social media. There's just a little bit more control, in a sense, on social media of how I want. It's not, and it's not even control of how other people see you. It's just how you want to see yourself. And so and I'm just taking this because this used to be more of a thing with editing, but people can fucking edit videos now too. So I don't even know if it hasn't changed that much. But people have this idea of themselves and this ideal version of themselves, and they think that if they see themselves in a certain way and edit themselves and have this perfect body image, or say the right thing, that then people are going to see you in a certain way. And there's no guarantees with that either. It's this false sense of control that we just think we have more of with social media. And so social media is just another tool, another mechanism that amplifies the insecurities and shit that we all already go through. And so understanding that it's not the truth, the things that you're seeing are not the reality. It's a curated version of someone's life. Like, it's a very small snippet of someone's life. And I had another point that I was going to bring up, and I can't remember it, but um, yeah, it's how seriously you take it, but it's just, again, it's another thing that comes down to responsibility, like being willing to see that your response to social media, or how you think it's controlling you or dictating your experience. It's just your response to it. And there is no control for how people are going to see you. And what I started with, like, everyone sees you differently than you see yourself. So there's no way to control a narrative in any way, shape, or form. And so it's just another opportunity to express yourself, or try and control how yourself is perceived. And there's consequences to it, and you experience the consequences, and there's no right or wrong way to use social media, but there's inevitable consequences to thinking that you have any degree of control through using that either. And you still don't. And you still don't know what someone else is going through. You still don't know what their life is actually like. Like your assumption of their life that seems so fucking perfect on social media isn't. It's not correct. It never is. You're getting, and it's like you're not even getting a snippet of a snippet. You're seeing a tiny bit and making this massive assumption about the things that they experience. But everyone has things that they're going through, and we oftentimes use tools like that to try and feel better, but it's still that grasping for certainty, control, validation, all of these external things that just cut us off from the experience that we're having, the fullness that our life could be when we let go of the idea that we have any control whatsoever of how someone sees us or what we're going through or the certainty that we hold on to about how we're perceived.
And on the flip side to that, because I know who asked this question, and it's really interesting because you start to think about impact, right? Like especially for those who want to make a beneficial ripple, let's just say, and they want to make content that brings across a message that's going to be beneficial to people. It's so interesting to recognize that who you are talking to, or rather who you are talking for, changes the message itself. Because if the message is that they can be themselves, then you should be talking for yourself. And if you're not, your message will be distorted accordingly. Right? And so the more you just talk for yourself, the more those who are looking for that message, the more those who are willing to resonate with that message will resonate with it. They'll hear it because you're actually being it. It's like we always say, you can't teach being, right? Because in that you're not being. So it can be tricky, but yeah, I am convinced that it's not about the size of the ripple, but the quality of it. Because the quality of the ripple is what determines who receives it. And often those are the people that are ready to do something with it. So just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, well said. I think we've gotten very caught in thinking that more is better, like more things, more likes, more followers, more money, more all of this. And yet it doesn't do anything to you here now. Like it's all an investment in this fiction that doesn't actually exist. It's just an assumption. And you don't have an ability to control reality. And especially when it comes to money, like people think with enough money, you can have control. And it's just as much an illusion as anything. It doesn't exist, that control that you think. And so I think that's where a lot of the desire to have more money comes in, is like more control. Like this is going to allow me to be happy. Like this is going to finally do it. It's finally going to be the thing. I have enough. And it's still just you here now. You have a bunch of money, you don't have any money. It's still you here now and your response to the situation that you're in. Is there benefit to a degree? Is I think it's been there's been some studies out that it's like, I don't know, 50, 60, $70,000 a year. Like you go above that and like your happiness really doesn't shift almost at all. It's like there are certain thresholds, of course, to getting to where it's like, it can change a lot of your life, but it's still like your entire reality is just you in this moment right now and your response to it and your willingness to take responsibility for that response and have impact over it. And there's no amount of money or things or experiences that change that. And it's like everything kind of becomes a little bit more neutral. It's like everything is just opportunity to grow, change, see yourself differently, see the world differently, see other people differently, and let go of the assumptions. And every single moment is an opportunity to do that. And so it's funny, like all these things that we attach to, that we drive towards, like they're not it. They don't do it. They don't take responsibility for you. They don't shift your response to the situation that you're in ever. That's on you. There's nothing else that can do that for you. There's not a dollar bill that can do that for you. There's not a compliment that can do that for you. There's not a like that can do that for you. There's not a thing that can do that for you ever. And so there's a beauty in that no matter what you're going through, it's always you going through that. And they're all opportunities to shift that perspective. Oftentimes, the ones that seem the most fucked and the most difficult and the most arduous are have the potential to be the most impactful. Like those are really where the lessons stick and the shifts are made and the perspectives are changed and the freedom is felt going through that. And so it's not about shifting your situation. It's about shifting you and your response to it, no matter what you're going through, every single moment, every single day. And there's a massive beauty in the freedom of that, the ability to shift your response right now, just like that. See things a little bit differently. That thing you're so sure of, maybe it's not. Maybe you can't be sure. Maybe they're not looking at you like that. Maybe this isn't this awful thing that you're going through. Maybe there's something else that's happening behind the scenes that you don't even realize is happening. Maybe there's a lot to be learned from this situation when you let go of the certainty that you feel that this is a shitty thing that I'm going through. This is a terrible thing that I'm going through. You start to see the lessons. You start to see the things that you were missing when you were so sure that your perspective was correct, because you never are. You never can be. That's okay, but it allows you, letting go of the false certainty allows you to see what's actually happening as opposed to what you think is happening. It's like you can focus on that false certainty or you can focus on what's actually happening, which isn't what you think.
You can almost feel the fucking cage loosening, eh? It's so funny. Like, it's so very interesting. People have asked me for a long time, like, kind of what's the secret? Being fucking relentless, as your brain is to some degree, right? Like, I've said it to somebody recently, like, if you're not talking to yourself, your brain's talking to you. And it's not saying anything that it hasn't done previously. It's not doing anything but assumption and judgment, right? Like you're just listening to a comparison machine telling you about the benefits of comparison. But your awareness is something else. See, you can decide to question that comparison. You can decide to question the reality of that comparison. You can decide to question the reality of the thought and the feeling that's fucking accompanying it. You can decide. Or you can listen to the comparison machine telling you that it fucking knows everything. Because what does it know? Everything that it's experienced up until now, which to it is everything, right? But it doesn't understand your potential. It can't understand potential, right? Because potential is unknown. And you are potential. And so it helps to remember that you can actively just question every fucking thought you have a tendency to believe in. You really can. And all you're really doing is disempowering your belief in the reality of that comparison machine. Just recognizing that it's not flawless, that it can only see so much, and that it cannot comprehend what is. It can only try and describe what has been.
Exactly. Knowledge is all from what's been. Can't really know what you are, what you're going through ever. You can't. And we had a comment here. Where'd it go? Why let go if it's not what you think? So I think it's important to realize like letting go isn't necessarily an action as much as it is a cessation of an action. Like it's the lack of holding on. So it's not what you think. letting go is what's left when you recognize that it's not what you think. It's like, if it's not what you think, there's nothing to hold on to. And so it's not that you're actively, oh, I have to let go of this. It's just that you're not holding on. So it's not this thing that's like, I'm letting go. I'm doing this thing. Because there's like I don't know, like the certainty in that I am doing it, as opposed to I'm just not holding on so tightly to everything all the time anymore. I'm just not holding on to this thing that I can't be sure of, holding on to this perspective because it makes me feel safer. It makes me feel more comfortable. It makes me feel more certain, despite having a fuckload of consequences. It's like, oh, I just want to feel like I know. I just want to feel like I know what's going on, because you can't know. You can try and feel like you do and then experience all the consequences that come with it. And I can't force you to do it. I can't force you to not hold on to anything. I can't even convince you adequately. It's on you. Like, keep holding on, keep thinking that keep keep being so sure of everything, and you'll experience plenty of consequences in no time. Like, it won't even take very long at all, but you absolutely can. You can spend your whole life being sure that being sure that what you think is happening is actually what's happening. You can do it. It's a totally acceptable way of living your life. And it comes down to you and your willingness to, I don't know, keep going through the consequences, keep banging your head against that wall forever. But you can. Banging your head against the wall, there's nothing wrong with that. It just kind of hurts. Like, you probably get a headache pretty quick. Maybe, I don't know, a bloody forehead for a while, but there's nothing wrong with that. You can. I'll tap you on the shoulder and be like, hey, you can stop. There's nothing wrong. I can keep doing this. Okay. Keep going. Have at it. So, yeah, I'm not telling you to do anything. I'm just saying that what you're holding on to, the certainty that you have, that you feel like you have, isn't the only option. That's all we're ever saying. We're not telling anyone to do anything. We're just recognizing that the thing that you've been holding on to for so long, the one option that you've been holding on to for so long, isn't the only option. That's it. Doesn't mean that's an option that shouldn't be happening or shouldn't be held on to, but it's just not the only option. You don't have to. And you've experienced enough consequences to know that as well. But for a while, you maybe have thought that it's the only option because you're so sure of what you are, but you can't be. And so, just that it's not the only option. That's all.
And imagine how long it took us to get to a point where we can have that conversation openly without somebody going, "This is religion, this is spirituality." It's just a conversation about what? About a leap in insight that's been collectively achieved by numerous different people throughout human history, and now it's actually just becoming more involved with the common discussion. This idea that you're not what you think. I mean, this is something that religions and philosophies have been built around, but it's really not something that needs to have a religion or philosophy built around it. It's just a simple recognition that you're not what you think. You're not what you think. What you think is incomplete. It has to be, because it's only based on what you've experienced and what you know and what you've had the time to kind of imagine. That's it. That's the whole thing. So knowing that, you just don't take everything at face value. And that means you have more capacity to learn. And what are you learning about? Yourself and your own ability to adapt as you continue to grow and learn, because that's all you're ever learning about yourself. This has been a lot of fun today. We have about 10 minutes left, so I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who could join us for this live stream. I do want to mention that we have a tier 1 call after this. This is an hour-long group discussion. We do these 5 days a week. You can join us on Patreon. I'll put the link up there, patreon.com/dualistic unity. We love these groups. They're a lot of fun. The Monday groups are always great. You can get a 7-day free trial if you're not sure whether the groups are for you or not. Just check out patreon.com/dualistic unity. Or if you'd like, you can also join us every Wednesday, 6 p.m. Eastern time, for a free group Zoom. You can register at dualisticunity.com under the live events button in the navigation bar. And we do that every week at 6 p.m. Eastern, except, of course, for next week, because next week we will be on our way to our Vermont retreat. So, Wednesday next week, we will not be available. We're going to be in Vermont with 11 guests at this fucking awesome woody cabin. I can't express how fucking stoked I am about this. I love the fact that we have a pool table, there's a hot tub, pond on the actual property. We're up on a mountainside, which is really, really nice. We're going to have food, we're going to chill out. It's just going to be fantastic. So I'm really looking forward to meeting everybody there. Again, I want to throw up a link here. If anybody would like to join us for a possible mini retreat in Vancouver from October 5th to October 9th, go to dualisticunity.com/Vancouver or use the little QR code that I just put on the screen, and just let us know that you're interested. And then if we decide to do that event, we'll contact you and offer you a ticket. And if you're on Patreon, of course, you end up saving money based on your tier. Tier 3 supporters save $350 off of all retreat tickets. So it's absolutely worthwhile. And of course, you get some merch too.
Yeah, and Patreon, we got, I believe, what do we have tomorrow? Roundtable. So if you'd like to join us, that's part of that free trial on tier 2. You can just get on a podcast and join us, and they're always a blast. You can come with thoughts, questions, stories, anything you want to share, and then it's a published podcast episode that will exist in perpetuity. Dualistic Unity podcast. And yeah, if you've ever wanted to be a guest on a public podcast, it's a great opportunity to do so. And you can talk, we have a large and rapidly growing audience. And so you know, if you have a business or you do social media, like it's a great opportunity to promote your stuff. But yeah, I always enjoy those conversations. They're always a blast. I'm very excited for that tomorrow. We also, this has been a lot of fun. We've had a solid crew here today. This has been a blast. So I appreciate everyone for being as active as you are in the chat. We try and get to as many questions as we can during it, and that's the beauty of the groups that we do 5 days a week on Patreon. Is there's lots of questions that go around, thoughts that go around. It's an opportunity to be on the screen with us, just like this, except with some other people as well. And they're always beautiful and healthy and inspiring conversations with a bunch of people who are willing to be as uncertain and question as many things as you are without a need to judge, without a need to come to even a conclusion or an answer. It's just the continued process of questioning and realizing that, oh, maybe the thing I was so sure of isn't as sure as I thought. So we got one of these coming up in about 20 minutes, and we do them 5 days a week. So definitely hop in there. I did see a question just about getting back to knowing. I want to get back to knowing, and that's just it. Is the getting back. The idea that there's something to get back to, that there's somewhere else other than right here, right now. There is no other spot that you get to clarity or peace or anything. It's just right now. And the idea that there is somewhere else to gets in the way of that. Like, that's the illusion, that there's a journey, that there's a process to any of this. We talked about this early on in the podcast. I think it's in season 1, the one-step process of just there isn't anywhere to get back to. We think about times in our life where like, oh, I was so at peace then. It's like, because you were where you were at. You were willing to be uncertain about what you were going through. I don't actually know. You have this whole idea of the situation that you're in. Oh, I'm going through this. It means this. I need to get here. It's like, you don't know that. And as that drops, as that certainty drops, you're just left with where you're at. You're like, oh yeah, I'm not so sure. Oh yeah, this is the only place I've ever been. This is all that there ever is. There isn't another experience. There isn't anywhere that you're getting. There isn't anything that you're becoming besides just you right now. And so as you're willing to be uncertain, as you're willing to pay attention to that without needing so heavily to know it or to know what's happening, this is where it is. This is that spot that you've been trying to get back to. It's just right here. And when you have had the experience where you feel like, oh, I'm so at peace, I'm so clear, I'm so whatever. It's like you were just willing to be where you were at. You were willing to be uncertain in the experience that you were in, and not be trying to get somewhere else, thinking that you should be somewhere else. There is nowhere else that you should be. It's just an assumption because you want to know, because you want to be sure, but you can't.
Isn't that funny, right? Like, I want to get back to the knowing that I don't know. It's like, you don't know. You're just afraid of what that means. And so your brain's just like, here, here, here. And of course, that's what it does. It's a comparison machine. It's telling you everything it does know. And you want to believe that because you're afraid, right? That's really it. Like, that's the only reason that the thoughts are tempting to believe in. It's the same reason God is tempting to believe in is fear. A fear of what would remain otherwise. And that's that whole self-knowledge thing that only comes through unfolding, throwing yourself in, seeing what it is you're capable of, and even then not taking thought and looking at that as truth, because that's the temptation. Once you start to actually get good at things, start thinking that your good thoughts are true, but your bad thoughts aren't. No, it's all thought. Just be yourself. Just be yourself. It's just that we have a tendency towards running from our fear or running from our response to uncertainty, not recognizing that the response to uncertainty is made worse by the running from it. Right? Like, it's difficult to deal with something you're not willing to look at. Right? And so once you're willing to look at it, you start to recognize that you can. And once you recognize that you can, then you start to get better at doing so. And it's all just being willing to face the uncertainty of recognizing your thoughts aren't truth. Your thoughts aren't truth. They are reflective of one aspect or another of truth. That's why you can have numerous different thoughts about the same goddamn thing. It's not that any of them are invalid. It's just none of them are complete. And you could spend all day long thinking about all the possible thoughts about one individual situation, and you'll never think of all of them. But none of them are complete, and none of them are the truth. What is what remains, which is what you are. Just surrender to it. That's it. And understand that the reason that you don't is just a tendency to react to uncertainty and fear, not recognizing that the uncertainty is you. Uncertainty and potential go hand in hand. Uncertainty is potential. You are potential. You are uncertainty. Just be uncertainty and watch what you're capable of.
Well said. Yeah, this has been a very fun chat. I really like the tendency one. I marked that down. It was at 43 minutes, so we'll get that clipped up because that.
That's a great one for sure. I would love to see that as an actual movement, like disorder with a bbig fucking cross through it and tendency. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I mean that changes so much of the weight of that because it's no longer something that's you, that's self-defining, that's self-validating. It's just something that you do sometimes, and there's so much less weight that comes with that. It's like if you can shift that perspective of a disorder not being a disorder, not being something that's wrong, but just a tendency that has some consequences, and that's just it. It doesn't mean anything about you. It doesn't mean that you're wrong. It's not actually wrong to do it. It's just, yeah, there tends to be a cost, but there's nothing wrong, and it's nothing wrong with the experience of it. It's just a tendency that you've gotten comfortable and familiar with as a response. Just another sort of habit, like biting your nails. I used to do that a while until I realized that I was get a lot of fucking hangnails and I would bleed, and so I stopped doing it. And it took some time, but now it's like I do have to cut them, and I do want to bite them kind of right now, and I still do it sometimes. But it's not something that means anything. It's just a tendency, just a bunch of tendencies that we've built up over time that are not solidified. They're not stagnant, and they can change when you would like to change.
So long as you don't judge yourself for it.
Yeah.
So long as you do exactly what you just did. You looked at the habit with awareness, self responsibility, and self honesty and went, yeah, that's something I'd like to do. And you don't think to yourself, and therefore there's something wrong with me. But you think about it as a result of not judging yourself. And you go, right, but there's a consequence to that. And then you actively have to work against the habit. That's the only way to unravel it, right? Is to look at it and then not do it. But that's it. And it's not easy any more than it's easy to not scratch a mosquito bite. Right? But once you recognize the consequence of doing so, it becomes a lot easier. Right? So the whole point is recognition. And as we said very early in season 1, simple, not easy. Right? Recognition is the big part. Application is another part of recognition. So we're going to end here. We're going to continue on in 14 minutes on Patreon. If you can join us there, we'd love to see you. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. We look forward